And welcome everybody to another episode of the most important conversations on business and leadership. I'm here with my co-host, Dan Silverberg. Boy, I can't even talk today. Dan, how you doing today?
I'm awesome, Chad. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. So we've been talking for the last couple of episodes about this moment of profound, exponential, and dramatic change that we are experiencing right now around the world on every level. There isn't a single level that is being untouched by the impact of artificial intelligence, now the impact of the complete re-engineering of the global trade system, of the economic system that is having disruptive effects in terms of our politics and how we organize ourselves as societies. And before we started the podcast today, you had brought some ideas up that I want you to just frame for our listeners and viewers in terms of taking the conversation we've been having around how do employees handle this moment of profound change and uncertainty as a result of artificial intelligence and the displacement of their jobs. But it also has a dramatic impact on leadership and how leadership thinks about the future of the company and the future of their role and how they handle uncertainty and change. Why don't you just frame it a little bit in terms of what you were sharing with me before we started today?
Sure. So, as we said, that with the AI and uncertainty and change, there's going to be a whole new evolution and birthing of something we don't know yet what it is. It's called the unknown.
Mm-hmm.
Since we've been talking, what we're now seeing politically is supply chains need to be reordered. Trading partnerships now need to be reevaluated. So we're not just seeing it in terms of our job or even the company that we play with, or maybe even as much as the industry. So when we looked at this concept of VUCA, which was volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, that's a lot for the human mind to have to absorb. So what I wanted to do was try to bring some structure to it. In an uncertain world, historically, my experience in tier one corporations was we would take the uncertainty, we would look at our environment, and we would make what I call operational responses. So I think all of us are used to the idea maybe a recession's coming, maybe there's a slowdown. So what are we going to do? We're going to decide maybe we're not giving as big a bonus. Maybe we're going to hold new hires. Maybe we're going to reduce our marketing expense. We're going to try to optimize our operations. And so in an uncertain world, in a known structure called our business or our industry, we make what I call these operational responses. And we think that over time, whatever is going to go down is going to come back up, and then we'll be ready because we're more financially aligned with the environment. And what I'm going to say is that the environment now is the key word.
Mm.
That as I look at the environment, whether again for the employees, C-suite, leadership, industry, or enterprise, there is a restructuring of the playing field. And a lot of companies, a lot of C-suite leaders, and a lot of employees will find they are in the wrong stadium. They're in the wrong theater. They're in the wrong game. And so I think from a leader perspective, how do I take a look at my known environment and start to rethink an unknown environment? And now, what would I start to do? And with this unknown environment, can I create and architect a new structure? So we talked a little bit about companies and industries and where has this happened in the past. So one of the things we talked about was BlackBerry versus iPhone. This was where structural change became a hurdle that literally couldn't get overcome. So we all know that BlackBerry, when it came out, we had Motorola and flip phones and all that for the consumer, but BlackBerry architected a structure for enterprise security. So in the financial world, in the government world, where you really wanted a secure network, you had a BlackBerry. Well, all of a sudden, iPhone comes out, and now there's a whole new structured game called a computer in your hand. There's an there's a store now for apps. You can put music on it. You can Google and find out all the information, and they're sitting over here with an enterprise security game.
Mhm.
They're sitting talking about the feature called enterprise security, and Apple never talks about the feature, they talk about the aspiration.
Mhm.
Here's a structure change. We all know what happened to Blockbuster to Netflix. These are structural change. What was Blockbuster going to do? Get videos instead of one for $1?
Right.
So this is
And even Netflix had to change from being a DVD service to a streaming service.
Right.
Yeah.
So now we look at the music industry, we look at the movie industry, now we're looking at the media industries. So the structural change of having a podcast with 60 million people playing versus the New York Times, the Washington Post, if they have 1 million readers, 2 million readers, they're not even a blip. They're not in
Mhm.
the game.
Mhm.
And so their band-aid is we'll put up a wall, and then we'll have a thing where you can come and be electronic with us.
Yeah,
That's
the
all.
structural change in media was profound because we and change is just what it is. It doesn't make it good or bad or beneficial or not beneficial. It's just change. We can look at the changes in the economic models that we've been used to, the trade alliances that we've been used to, all of this stuff. We can debate whether or not it should be happening, it's a good idea, or this, that, and the other thing. But the reality is, so what? It's happening, and so how are you going to relate to it? In the case of media, we used to have gatekeepers that determined whether you and your content and your ideas were worthy of publishing, whether that was ideas in the form of music or ideas in the form of literature or ideas in the form of video content, etc., vis-a-vis television and film. And with the advent of social media and the advent of the iPhone, which then Samsung and Google came out with their whole competitor, but that concept of the smartphone, all those gatekeepers fell away. Now anybody could put whatever they wanted out there. And again, we could debate the merits of this. We could debate whether we should have a system where anyone and the most ridiculous idea in their head is given the exact same opportunity to build an audience as someone who's truly a master in an area. That's a worthy conversation, but it doesn't affect the reality that, to the point you're making about structural changes, because of these structural changes in terms of how media operates, it still is the case. Now, we might see a new gatekeeper model emerge out of this. I expect we will, because, we've been here before in sort of more rudimentary ways, with the advent of yellow journalism at the turn of the last century, and how ubiquitous and easy it was for anyone who could get their hands on a printing press to print their pamphlet, their newsletter, their newspaper. We went through a period of this where it was sort of anyone and everyone with an opinion could get it out there in an early version of this, right? And then you had sort of the publishing industry really start to emerge as a gatekeeper to determine who got placement in bookstores and who got placement in advertising and who got placement, to advance certain ideas and reject other ideas. Now, we can argue that, this wasn't in the interest of John Stuart Mill's marketplace of ideas. And one could say, that ultimate free speech from a very libertarian standpoint is the ultimate objective. And there certainly are benefits to that. But then on the flip side, we're seeing how a lot of, in some cases, what I would call crazy speech. I always say to people, we don't need free speech. We need something a little deeper than that. Because I always talk about how freedom implies responsibility. Most people don't think of it that way. If you want to be totally free, you are totally responsible for all of the things that your freedom provides. You can't go and blame someone. You can't point the finger at someone because you're free. By definition, you are the master of your own domain. But most people conflate freedom with license, which is like, I want to do whatever I want to do without any of the consequences and responsibilities, right? That's what license is. And I think we've got some confusion right now in the world where people are conflating freedom for license. If we want free speech, it implies responsible speech at the same time, because you are responsible for your speech and its impacts on the world. You can't just put it out there and then walk away and say, well, why am I responsible for that? But that's what we have right now. And so I do suspect that we're going to see a new gatekeeper emerge. It's a systemic thing. There's going to be gatekeepers that just emerge. There's always order out of chaos, right? And what social media has done is it's introduced a level of chaos that we've all been living with for the past 15 years because order hasn't emerged yet, but it will emerge. In the same way for leaders inside of companies with these structural changes you're talking about, it's going to feel like chaos for a while, but order always emerges out of chaos. And so the question for the leader who's peering into the uncertainty and trying to understand what might the unknown look like, that's the wrong question, because you're looking for answers. So what you're doing is you're looking out into the unknown, and at best, you're just approaching it as an innovator. But if you're approaching it as a true creator, you're not looking into the unknown trying to see what emerges. You're deciding what emerges as a creator. You are imposing it on the unknown. And that's, I think, a shift in thinking that a lot of leaders have yet to make. They're still out there looking for evidence, for guideposts, for some kind of data points that they can hang on habituated behavior and say, oh, what we've always done can kind of fit in over here because this is what, but that's merely an innovation. If you truly want to be a creator and be in a creator situation, you have to effectively say, I'm embracing the unknown and I will impose my creation into this unknown as a creator. So it's a very different way of thinking about it.
I think that, to kind of just make it simple, if we look at brick and mortar retail, that would be what I call the secular playing field of consumer, go to retail, pick up what you want.
Yeah.
But Amazon comes in and they totally change the game. It's not about brick and mortar. It's about a supply chain, warehousing, and instant delivery, right? So now brick and mortar, A, they can't afford to do that. B, they don't even know what's happening to them until it's really too late.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got that idea. We talked about Blockbuster and then Netflix. And Netflix, all of a sudden, you're getting in the mail what you want. You don't have to go to the store. What was Blockbuster supposed to do? And yet even Netflix then had to go to streaming from its DVD environment.
Mm-hmm.
So if we look at those kinds of things, when we look at AI and what is the secular change that's going to take place, my belief is that we started out at influencer. I think influencers now is a dead game. It's still out there, but it's not
Mm-hmm.
leading anymore. So then we go, okay, content is king. So now those of us that can put out the best IP content, we're going to be the winners. Except what AI does is that whatever content you put out, it can put out. So it's now
Yeah.
you get commoditized. So if
Yeah.
you're now a content creator, what's the next thing that's going to happen? So we're going to see these changes. We're going to see, for example, in medicine, we are going to move from you have a problem, now we'll solve it, to much more preventative and much more out front of the problem before it ever materializes. There's AI out there right now that literally a decade out could predict a stroke. There's a out there that can tell you 3 to 4 days before you're ready to have a heart attack. So these are true rapid change in a secular world, right? They're doing diagnosis of X-rays much better than the doctor can. So it's not that the doctor is going to get eliminated necessarily, but the structure, the business model, the environment, that's going to change dramatically. If you're a PwC, a McKinsey, a Deloitte, I'm going to argue that your content, in the same way that an audit became a commodity to the big four, that was not where you were going to make your money. I'm going to say that the strategic content idea, that AI will do a lot for that. So now, what is your new playing field? When we look at the legal profession, I'm aware now that AI is coming in, and what legal firms are doing, I thought they would get rid of their paralegals because they could do a lot better research. What they're doing is they're taking the middle layer of attorneys, getting rid of them, and
Mhm.
the top attorney partners are doubling. So if you're used to $1,000 to $1,200 an hour, now they're $2,500 an hour. Why?
Mhm.
Because the research part's the easy part. It's the
Yep.
strategic and the experience. So we're going to see, I think, professional services change dramatically. What in those environments, they are so used to being cautious. Who in the partnership is going to say, we may just need to blow up the caution and move over to this idea?
Mhm.
And so, no matter where you are in the field, I'm going to say that this uncertainty should be a catalyst for you to start to think about your whole world differently.
Well, it's going to be we've been saying this for a couple years now on different podcasts and some of our work at TMIC, that, what you just described is what I call the master attorney. So, in the same way that you have a master electrician who's responsible to check all the boxes on the house or the building and make sure it's to code. The legal code is all in the brain of AI. So you don't need, like you said, paralegals and mid-level attorneys anymore. You're just going to have a master attorney. You're going to have a master accountant, a master engineer, a master IT person. And these are going to be much, much reduced positions in terms of how many there are going to be available. And so, but what we've been talking about for a few years now is the need to learn how to be a creator. A lot
Mhm.
of people don't know what we're talking about. When we say that, people think of creators, they think of artists, they think of musicians, they think of filmmakers. They're like, how can a lawyer be a creator? How can an engineer, be seen or experienced through the lens of a creator, or an accountant? But we're all creators all the time. We just don't realize it. We're always creating our life, even when it's happening from a sort of conditioned subconscious place. And so the skill set, though, of being able to intentionally be a creator, and what does that mean to create in the face of no thing? Well, all artistic creators have known this for all time. Before there's music, there's a blank sheet of paper. Before there's a book, there's a blank sheet of paper. Before there's a painting, there's a blank canvas. And so the nature of an artist, a lot of people are just born with it, but it can be learned. And I've been arguing for the last couple of years that everyone is going to need to, even leaders in corporations are going to need to embrace their inner creator. They're going to have to learn how to think creatively. They're going to have to learn how to activate their right brain. They're going to have to learn how to no longer rely on their left brain, because this is, you can't innovate fast enough in a period of exponential change because it's happening faster than you can even process it. So you have to get ahead. The only way you can get ahead of it is by being a creator of what comes next.
Yeah, exactly. And so when you look at it, one of the things that I think I did in my career is the ability to look at 10,000 dots and create something new out of it. It's not
Mhm.
that it all has to come from nothing, but there has to be a different song to it. So Beethoven wrote his best symphonies when he was deaf.
Yeah.
Milton wrote Paradise Lost when he was blind, right? Helen Keller had an amazing life being both deaf and blind. That to me are the
And
highest.
mute.
Yeah. So these are levels of the creative. And so what I would say is the first step, can you really even identify the dots of your own industry? So I come out of consumer product. It never occurred to me that having 12 things of toothpaste on an 8-foot shelf, I didn't even see that as innovative. I just saw that as brain dead.
Mm.
So now as we start to look at how do we go to market, what is it we're going to bring? It's a whole different way of thinking. How do I
Mhm.
think my entire supply chain? How do I rethink what channels of distribution? So what are the adjacencies that I might be able to take a look at that I've never looked at before? Not everybody is going to be able to start from ground zero. But for those of us who can, it's going to be an unbelievable opportunity. There will be a lot of failure, but there's going to be a lot of success. This creation that you're talking about, this creator ability creates competitive advantage. It creates moats. It creates viability because you're going to get a first to market if you have the ability to distribute. For people to catch up, we all know what the cost of switching is all about, right?
Mhm.
So now we have to start to look different than here's a product, here's our cost, here's the margin, here's the net profit. In a consumer product company, $100 million to launch a shampoo that is basically 90% water and lauryl sulfate so that it foams.
Mhm.
Really?
Well, and by the way, the assumption they're making under that is that all of the conditions and the structure you're talking about is holding steady. So,
Right.
they can make certain assumptions about the development of a product, how to get it to market, what people's response. There are models that we have built over the last 100 or so years that are used in the calculations to determine risk, to determine the potential of success, to determine how to roll something out. And a lot of those models are now being challenged. That's going to cause a lot of companies to spend a lot of money and not get the results that they historically could expect to get.
Right. So take a look at Costco, which is one of my favorites. They make their money on membership, not on what they sell.
Yeah.
Can you imagine going to a Stop and Shop or an Albertsons or a Kroger and have to pay
Pay.
$65 so that you can go buy eggs? It's
Yeah.
so they changed the structure. Then what they did is they changed a margin. Then what they did is they created a treasure hunt. Then what they did is they worked a supply chain where traditional packaging didn't apply. So if you
Yeah.
go in now and you want to buy tomato sauce, you don't buy a jar, you buy a huge jar with
Yeah.
3,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so they totally changed the theater, or they totally reimagined what a game could look like, and they're one of the most profitable games out there.
They became the world's largest retailer of wine, of all
Mhm.
things.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, and so I think these are the kind. So I'm not expecting the Procter and Gambles and Unilevers and all of those companies, but to necessarily be able to do what we're talking about. But what's interesting in watching Unilever now is, and Procter and Gamble, the whole idea of there's only a couple ways to grow. You either grow organically with what you have, you develop new product, or you acquire. That was the game playbook. That is still the game today. So when you look at these companies, they've got hundreds of brands, and what they do every 36 months is, okay, we're going to get rid of these 60 brands. So Unilever just decided to get rid of Ben and Jerry's and their whole ice cream idea because
Mhm.
that's just not it anymore. So
Mhm.
they make these, again, operational responses, what I call incremental change. So that will leave a void. We had 60 brands. We're now getting rid of them. I guarantee you within 36 months, they'll go out and buy new stuff because they'll let the entrepreneur create a market, show that it's there, and then they'll go buy it. And with their
Yeah.
distribution, whatever they pay for it, it doesn't matter.
Mhm.
Coca-Cola bought Vitamin Water. It was a $350 million company. They paid 4.1 billion for it. That's not chump change.
Yeah.
I thought this is gonna take forever. In a year, they got back all of what they had spent to buy it because they had the vending business, they had the sports
Mhm.
center business, they
They
had
were vertically integrated. Yeah.
right? Well,
Yeah.
and the distribution deal, direct store delivery, right? They had all of these pieces,
Mhm.
these structural models. This has been over 100 years now.
Mhm.
FedEx came out, totally changed the structure. You'll need it tomorrow morning. We'll get it there by 10 a.m. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So even in what I call secular businesses that are older, look at the phone company AT&T that secularly had the entire phone business, and then all of a sudden it got split up. Their core competence was never being in the phone business. It was knowing how to manipulate the government and get all
Mm-hmm.
the regulation that they needed to be in the phone business. There was
Mm-hmm.
the argument that GM was never in the car business. It was a healthcare company making cars.
Mm.
We talked about Les Wexner and The Limited and Bath and Body Works and Victoria's Secret. And if you would ask most people what business were they in, they'd say, "Oh, he was a retailer." No,
Yeah.
what it was a real estate play called 1,000 Doors in every mall in the country that became a billion-dollar profit center. And
Mm-hmm.
so how do we
Or McDonald's is a farm.
Yeah.
It's,
Well,
it's, it's basically
McDonald's
farms.
didn't make money until it became a real estate. They really were a real estate play.
Yeah.
Sold
Yeah.
hamburgers. So how do we start to think differently about when we think what our business is, what might it be differently?
Mm-hmm.
And and I think so to me, this is a really exciting period, and it will be fraught with fear, anxiety, and displacement if you're looking for guardrails and stability and certainty, and I know as long as I just do my little job, because AI, to your point, is the left brain game. So if you have a
Yeah.
process to an outcome,
Yeah.
you're you're in the accounts payable department. That 18 touches for you to get the payable out is going to
Yeah.
be two, and if there's 7 of you, we're only going to maybe need one to oversee it.
That's right.
So when I sold my beverages into Walmart or the grocery chains, if my delivery matched their order, it was instant payment. No one looked at it. This is what the government is finding now. If you just put through something, Social Security, unemployment insurance, put a $7 million bill in the government, and if there's a purchase order against, no one checks anything.
Mm-hmm.
This idea is, I think, how do we change and how do we get to that sort of creativity? And if we can do that and we can create the new stadium, the new theater, the new entity, the new industry,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to have a very prosperous move forward.
Yeah. And one of the challenges that I think a lot of leadership are going to wrestle with, because we've been so indoctrinated in our culture to be left brain dominant. The challenge, so like TMIC, things that we're setting up through Whole Life Architecture. Whole Life Architecture is a program that helps individuals, develop their right brain to start thinking differently about their life, and then to re-architect their life so that it's actually aligned with, their own sense of authenticity and their own true self, whatever that means, right? People discover that for themselves. But the other thing that we're doing, and so it's a creative program, but the other thing that we're doing is, rolling out a program to help people learn to think creatively. It's not and the challenge with thinking creatively is there is method to it. There are processes and models and things that help unlock it, but you're dealing with something that is more abstract and less certain. When you're dealing with left brain stuff, it's 1 and 1 is 2. But when you're dealing with creativity, you're dealing with, I liken it to the difference of sort of like hard power versus soft power. Hard power is obvious. You strike something, you get an outcome. Soft power is influential. It's you're dealing with the subtleties of things. And so creativity is a soft power. You're dealing with the emotions. You're dealing with the ability to use your imagination, which is something that, for many of us has been largely conditioned out of us. A lot of companies want to hire employees that don't color outside the lines, don't get any creative ideas. We know what we want to do. We have a system in place. We have an outcome that, and a method and a process that firmly delivers. And all of this is being thrown upside down right now. And so for a lot of leaders and employees alike, the 90% that Pew Research says work for companies, whether you're a leader in that company or you're an employee, you're still baked into an infrastructure and a system that's highly predictable and reliable, despite some of the uncertainty that you deal with. We're moving into a phase now where uncertainty is the name of the game. And so to be a creator means that we have to be uncomfortable with nuance, be uncomfortable with unpredictability, be uncomfortable with using become comfortable with using our imagination, which is what I call is the simulator in your brain, right? And our brain, incidentally, doesn't know the difference between the real world and a simulation. This is why training airline pilots is so effective in simulators, because as far as your brain's concerned, even though you drove to the simulator and you walked in with your Starbucks and you sat down in a fake cockpit, as soon as you start to go through the simulation, you get nausea, sweaty palms, you get all of these vomit reflex, all of these symptoms, if you're in a tail dive or something like that. So it's a very effective way to train people. And so the power of our imagination is such that we need to teach people how to use it again, because it's been really relegated to really just what we think of the creative industries. And it hasn't been something that's been dominant in a lot of corporate culture. They may have creative departments, that handle that kind of stuff. But generally, in terms of how companies make decisions, it's been at best innovation, and innovating within a set of rules and structures that have always existed as far as the company was concerned. And it was just a matter of tweaking these levers to get different results. Now we're saying all the levers are blown out, and you can't, or some of them are blown out, and you can't predict which ones are still viable anymore. So this whole period is going to require people to learn how to think and act creatively. And that's a whole different skill set than learning how to just follow your left brain.
Yeah, and I think, to your point, when you're in a my experience in a corporation was that there was a system there, and you understood how decisions were made. Were they data-driven? Were they intuitive? We've done it this way forever. I've been in this industry 30 years. And so there's a predictability, and the risk is narrow, and what's possible has to be really easily understood by a lot of people. In the
Yep.
new world, limitless possibility. We're moving from the linear to the exponential to the infinite.
Yep.
So if I'm creating, and you and I are both creating new businesses, they don't look like anything that's out there currently. It's limitless in terms of what we can design and architect based on, and then you'll get this idea. So in an entrepreneurial world, the word is pivot.
Yep.
In the traditional world, what are all the consulting firms saying? You need to be agile and you need
Yeah.
resilient. If you are agile and resilient, you are in the secular structure, right? That
Yeah.
is operationally responsive. Agility is being able to respond to your environment that you're currently in. It has nothing to do with over here.
Exactly. Yeah.
So we're going to need as creators to have more of a sense of trial and error. I looked at it as what I did in the last 10 years is I put myself out there as a scientist. I'm not a scientist in the true sense of the word. I'm a scientist in my belief that scientists work in labs. And when you
Mm.
work in a lab, you don't work in a binary world of success and failure. You
Yep.
work in a world of thesis, antithesis, thesis, antithesis. The more I keep going, the more I keep learning. That continuous learning, experimenting, and moving
Yeah.
forward, that's a creation game.
Yeah. Well, what you're saying is important, just as we wrap up, though. But I want to say this: what you just described is also going to require a total transformation of the thinking of the investment community. Because when you lean into creativity and the unknown, there's going to be a lot of lost investment and capital, but it's what's going to be required to figure out the new thing. I remember there was a talk that Warren Buffett and Bill Gates gave at Columbia University back in 2011. I'll never forget it. It was a really great talk. It was both of them kind of sitting on a panel, and Bill was reminiscing about what it was like in the early days of Microsoft and the early days of trying to come up with the personal computer and the belief that nobody would want a computer in their house. What was the purpose of this thing, right? And he said, I'm paraphrasing it, but he said something to the effect of he was disappointed with how risk averse the investment community has become. This is back in 2011. I'd say it's even more risk averse now. And he said, because, when they were trying to figure out the personal computer, it was an unknown. Would this succeed? How do you do this? How do you make it economical? How do you create something that has utility for people? Right? Because computing up until that point was, largely done in universities and governments and, for defense and these sorts of things. But what would someone who's just sitting at home need a computer for? So like an entire market had to be invented around this. And he said that roughly 90% of the investment that went into the personal computing creation of that market was lost. And he said, for every Microsoft that succeeded, he's like, we stood on the shoulders of hundreds of other small companies like us trying to also figure this out and learning the things that they learned that Microsoft was able, they effectively, he didn't say it this way, but what he was really saying is we just were able to survive long enough to learn what all the other companies learned through their failure. We could integrate that failure and that learning, which allowed us to succeed and thrive, right? But he said the only thing that made that possible was investment and investors not being risk averse of this unknown industry. Okay, that was personal computing. We're now on the precipice of a total unknown of the reorganizing of the entire economic system, not just one industry. So investors are going to have to get some guts, I guess is the only way to put it, and not be so risk averse, because we're going to need investment, and investors are important to the equation. I mean, they basically fuel and fund the ability to create the next thing. And if they're staying in this risk averse scenario and they're approaching this new marketplace, this new emerging unknown marketplace and economy, and they're saying, well, show me your 5-year plan. Are you kidding? 5 years? 3? I can't even tell you what's going to happen in 6 months. Change is happening so fast right now. Anything I tell you would effectively be at best a guess, if not an outright made up scenario, right? I mean, when you get Dell saying 85% of the jobs we will be doing by 2030 haven't been invented yet. I mean, you're sitting in front of an investor and they're saying, okay, what job or what part of the economy are you serving? I don't know. 85% of them haven't been invented yet. Like, it's
So
a
what's
weird
gonna
place to
happen?
be.
I believe that VCs right now are sitting in the old secular world of investing. And
Yeah.
I think there's gonna be lots of new models just to what you're talking about, because this idea that we'll get 1 out of 10 to do an IPO, that's the model. If I
Yeah.
get 2 of them that are sort of pretty good, even if they don't get to IPO, and the other 7 are a disaster,
Right.
there's gonna be a whole different way, I think, to your point on the risk. So, I wanna just leave you with a couple of questions as we wrap up.
Sure.
And I think what I wanna leave everybody with is what matters the most is to have a clear thesis for change. And if I were in the C-suite today, I would be meeting every 2 weeks for at least a couple
Oh,
hours
yeah. Oh,
to
yeah.
start to talk about what that could look like. And there's going to be, if you're looking for the answer, that you're probably in the wrong game. You want to look for
Mhm.
possibilities. You
That's
don't
right.
need to define it today.
Yeah.
If change is inevitable, how do you evaluate the quality of the change is one of the things you want to take a look at, because there's a lot of shiny objects out there. Which change is worth responding to and which one isn't? And where does the change create an opportunity for structural advantage? Where does it leave us far behind without the hope of ever catching up?
Mm.
And if we look at the restaurant business, we look at the retail business, we're down to one airplane company right now, and they're not even pretty effective at what they're up to. Just
Mhm.
look at what Musk has been able to do and Bezos with space that NASA, for some reason, couldn't do. But if
Mhm.
you wanna look at charging stations and electric vehicles, he basically has changed that industry. He's changed the space industry. He's changing the Neuralink for the brain in I mean, so you've got plenty of examples out there, and I think the only difference with Elon and maybe for those of us in traditional business, he doesn't see limit,
Mhm.
thinks about stuff differently. And
Mhm.
I think that's the challenge, and so I hope for all of our listeners that this has at least gotten your juices boiling and some fear of, "Oh my god, what am I supposed to do?"
Well, we'll end with this. If there was ever a moment in time where Apple's iconic brand slogan, "Think different," was relevant, it's right now,
Yeah.
right?
Chad, this is great.
All right, everybody. Appreciate you for tuning in. We'll see you on the next episode of the most important conversations on business and leadership that Dan and I are running. Looking forward to seeing you next time. Hope you got a lot of value out of this.
That concludes this episode of The Most Important Conversations. This in-depth conversation could set you on the path to self-improvement, which is essential if you want to be an effective leader and take meaningful action in your life. If you enjoyed this episode and want more of these stimulating discussions, you can find them at tmicglobal.com. Remember, the world is at a crossroads right now. You can't afford to waste this opportunity to take charge of your life, build meaningful relationships with others, and co-create a brighter tomorrow. Thank you for listening. See you on the next one.